You're listening to The Bible Guys, a podcast where a couple of friends talk about the Bible in fun and practical ways.
Hey, welcome to The Bible Guys. I'm Chris, this is Jeff, and we're excited to be here.
That's correct. And, for those of you that are longtime listeners, you know how committed we are to bringing only the finest news to our listeners. If you're new with us today, this is a special day for you because you're going to find out that we are committed to great news, particularly the news that we find on the Babylon Bee.
You know, maybe it's better if you actually read it and look up the article for yourself, but for some reason, I don't know if this segment translates as well as I think it does. Maybe it does, but I love this segment because it is so sophisticatedly funny.
Well,
right?
The Babylon Bee is funny. So if you don't know, the Babylon Bee is a satire website, and they do a lot of funny things, but one of the things they do is they publish most of their satire as actual news. They publish it as articles.
And it's usually like a bunch of sarcasm.
Yes.
Right? They're making fun of something by legitimizing it.
That's right.
It's so good.
So here's a self-help for the ladies, the lady listeners.
Yes.
On our show, which is about half of just under half of all of our listeners are ladies.
Yeah, just over half are males.
That's incredible.
Thank you.
What a coincidence.
Yes.
Yeah, which makes up a whole.
I figured that out all by myself.
Yeah, that's great. So on the Babylon Bee, there's an article. It says, confused by your husband's cryptic texts, let the Babylon Bee interpret them for you. So here's the article. Ladies, are you having a hard time knowing what your husband's texts really mean? Men are complicated creatures. So our relationship experts conducted a study to translate man texts into lady English.
That's great.
Here's a complete guide to what your man is really saying when he sends you that text. So when your husband sends you a thumbs up emoji, the translation is cool. When he sends you a text that just is simply the letter, when he sends you the text that's simply the letter K, the translation would be okay.
That's hilarious.
When he sends you a text that is LOL, the translation is I'm mightily amused but did not laugh.
Right.
When he sends you a text, kids are fine, the actual translation is I haven't seen the kids in an hour. I'm sure wherever they are, they're fine.
There it is.
The word when he sends you a text, take your time, translation is I don't want you coming home early and catching me on the 5th Helldivers 2 match.
Oh, that's funny.
And then when he says, do you know what aisle granola is in? The translation is, I've been looking for your dang granola for 30 minutes now, and I'm about to light the store on fire.
That is exactly right.
When he sends you a laughing emoji,
yep.
The translation is, I'm guessing this is the reaction I'd have if I watched the video that you sent me.
That's really funny. That's so funny. That is so funny.
When he texts the words, got it, the translation is, I did not read your text and will be calling in 15 minutes to ask you a bunch of questions you already answered in great detail.
That's funny, too.
When he sends you the text, do we have any Band-Aids? The translation is, I'm bleeding to death in the garage.
That's really good.
And then when he texts you the words, you okay? ? The translation is, I know that you're not okay, but I'm approaching you cautiously as though you were a wounded bear. That's easy. Since those are likely the only phrases your husband ever texts you, you'll now have no problem understanding what he's saying.
That is so funny.
Boy, we are really glad to bring that as a special service to our listeners today.
You know, I think the funniest part about this article for me is the first two of them, which is, when he says K, the translation is okay. Mm-hmm. When he says thumbs up, it's cool.
Cool.
Because we just are pretty uncomplicated creatures. We just say what we mean, right? What did you mean by that? Well, what I meant by that is exactly what I just texted.
What I meant, yes.
And I meant nothing else.
I've told my wife so many times, I'm just not as sophisticated as you think I am.
Right. Right.
I didn't mean anything else. That's all I meant. Okay. Well, hey, there we go. I can't think of anything else to add to that. I mean, that was just so complete.
It was complete. Well, I would just also say, oftentimes in conversation, when I say, like, for instance, I'll ask a question to my family sometimes, and I'll say, because I've got the dominant estrogen, so there's 3 estrogens, two hormones, or you know what I mean, testosterone.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, I'll ask a question, and I'll say something like, "Hey, why'd you do that again?" And instead of just saying, "Oh, that's why I did this," and then I'll be like, "Oh, okay," they would like attach all these things to my question. Well, what are you thinking? Are you thinking? Are you questioning why? Are you and all these attachments? And I'm like, well, actually, the only thing I meant was, I just wanted to know why.
Yes.
And I was actually like thinking about it in this other text or whatever. And it's just so funny how I seem to do that my entire marriage. My entire marriage, I just seem to say, I just was asked. I literally
asked one question, but the idea was there was probably 15 meanings behind it,
right.
Which then means, did you ever think about this? Because it kind of happens to, right now, I'm the one guy in the house and there's two women in my house, right? So my daughter and my wife. And so sometimes I realize that they think I mean more than I mean.
Yes.
Which then on occasion,
that's what I'm trying to say.
When I actually step out of the fog of my brain, it dawns on me, they must mean more than they're saying.
Right.
Maybe I'm missing a whole bunch, right? Because
Right.
I don't mean more than I say. Usually,
Right.
I don't have like a secondary.
What is this cryptic language of implication?
Right? I don't imply anything.
Right.
If I say I'm hungry, what I'm implying is I'm hungry.
That's it.
I'm not trying to say you're not taking care of me. I'm not saying anything.
Right.
I'm not questioning your judgment or your ability or anything else. I'm just making a statement.
Right.
But then it dawns on me, maybe I'm missing a bunch in the conversation, that there's a whole other conversation going on that I'm totally oblivious to.
And I'll tell you exactly what you're missing. You're missing the female chromosome. That's what you're missing. and that's the end of the story,
Yeah,
buddy.
there you go. Great.
You are not a woman.
Well, have fun after this episode.
Right.
Because doesn't Liz listen every day?
Every day. Every single day.
Yes,
and usually, I would say 99% of the time it's in the morning, unless she, for some reason, is running late for a very odd reason. But usually when she's getting ready. So right now, I could almost predict with accuracy, with certainty, that she is putting on her makeup. The phone is on the bathroom, in the master bathroom.
And she's yelling at it right now.
Yeah, right now. And
you are so in trouble, Christopher.
Actually, what she's doing is she's putting on her eye makeup and she's talking to herself, and she's like, okay, Chris, be quiet now.
He's in so much trouble.
He's in so much trouble when he gets in home.
Okay.
Yeah. That's what she's saying.
Well, good. Well, Liz, I just want you to know he's not talking about you specifically. He's guessing what it must be like for other men.
That's correct.
Because you are a wonder to behold and a mystery to him, and all those things, right?
I love you, baby.
There you go. So remember yesterday, anyways, we should get into this. So Jesus appears to these disciples. They're out fishing.
Yeah, seven of the 11.
That's right. Peter says, I'm going to go back fishing. And by the way, his decision affected 6 others. You know, a lot of times when we decide we're going to walk away from the mission we're supposed to be on, others will follow, right? That's what happens here. But Jesus doesn't go out and get mad. Instead, Jesus goes fix breakfast. Say, hey, guys, cast your net on the other side. And as soon as they do and they start catching a bunch of fish, John and Peter realize who this is, and Peter jumps in the water and swims to Jesus. It's just such a wonderful thing. Jesus meets Peter where he was.
And Jesus already had breakfast for them even before he called them out.
Or at least by the time Peter made it to shore, breakfast is ready. And
if you wonder where I'm laughing, see yesterday's episode.
Yeah, we wasted like 5 minutes on that one. So in John 21, verse 15, it says, after breakfast, so we do know breakfast gets finished.
Yes.
Jesus asked Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Yes, Lord, Peter replied. You know I love you. Then feed my lambs, Jesus told him. Jesus repeated the question, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Yes, Lord, Peter said, you know I love you. Then take care of my sheep, Jesus said. A third time he asked him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was hurt that Jesus asked the question a third time. He said, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. And Jesus said, then feed my sheep. I tell you the truth, when you were young, you were able to do as you liked. You just dressed yourself, you went wherever you wanted to go. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands and others will dress you and take you where you don't want to go. Jesus said this to let him know by what kind of death he would glorify God. Then Jesus told him, follow me. Peter turned around and saw behind them the disciple Jesus loved, the one who had leaned over to Jesus during supper and asked, Lord, who will betray you? Peter asked Jesus, what about him, Lord? Jesus replied, if I want him to remain alive until I return, what is that to you? As for you, follow me. So the rumor spread among the community of believers that the disciple wouldn't die. But that isn't what Jesus said at all. He only said, if I want him to remain alive until I return, what is that to you? This disciple is the one who testifies to these events and has recorded them here, and we know that his account of these things is accurate. Jesus also did many other things. If they were all written down, I suppose the whole world could not contain the books that would be written.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, well, that's such a grand phrase, right? I suppose the whole world cannot contain the books that would be written.
Yeah.
I don't suppose that that's a literal translation, is it? Like certainly.
Well, he says, I don't suppose. So
Yeah.
he's acknowledging hyperbole there.
Yeah, I think so too.
Don't you?
Yeah, I do, which is why I asked. So there's a note in the Life Application Study Bible about these three questions that Jesus asks Peter, and I love the detail. It says this: Jesus asked Peter 3 times if he loved him. The first time Jesus said, "Do you love?" he used the Greek word agape, sacrificial love. And so when he said, "Do you love me more than these?" The second time, Jesus focused on Peter alone and used the same Greek word. The third time, Jesus used the Greek word phileo, signifying affection, affinity, or brotherly love. He asked, in effect, "Are you even my friend?" Peter responded each time with the Greek word phileo. Jesus didn't settle for a quick, superficial answer. He has a way of getting to the heart of the matter. Peter had to face his true feelings and motives when Jesus confronted him. How would you respond if Jesus asked you, "Do you love me? Do you really love me? Are you even my friend?" Isn't that super insightful? Because, again, we say this at weddings, or at least I do, is that, unfortunately, when we used the word love, or when we translated the word love, we just translated it flippantly.
Right.
There's all these Greek words that mean specific things. There's friendship love, there's romantic love, there's sacrificial love, and yet we just translate them all to the same word love. And so here's what I always say I've been known to say this at weddings. I'll say, so we overuse the word love. I said, for instance, you may go to the reception and say, "Hey, I love these hors d'oeuvres." And then you look at your spouse and say, "Oh, and I love you too." I said, so your wife will have no choice but to compare herself to an hors d'oeuvre.
Right.
Because what other choice have we given her?
Right.
Right? Because we're using these word love. We're using the same word.
You love me like cheese and crackers and olives?
Right. But yet that's the way we use the word love.
Right.
So love means a bunch of things for us, but in the Greek, Jesus was very specific. So he says, "Do you love me unconditionally? Do you really love me unconditionally? And are you even my friend?"
Yeah.
That's wow.
Yeah. I love it because, there you go, love it.
There it is.
I love this passage because, Peter denied Jesus 3 times.
Mm-hmm.
And so Jesus comes back and lets Peter restate his love for him 3 times. Right. And there's something to that. I think it was incredibly emotional moment. And for Jesus to challenge him, right? Jesus doesn't let Peter off the hook on this one.
Mm-hmm.
Peter confronts the fact that, hey, you denied me. Let's address that. And sometimes I think we're tempted to sweep things under the rug. We're tempted to just kind of ignore a thing, to not address it. And long term, that does damage to relationships when we just don't address a thing. Now, the Bible does say that, love covers a multitude of sins and doesn't keep any record of wrong. And there's so many things like that. So sometimes it's not worth it. But other times, in this situation, Peter had denied Jesus 3 times, struggles with the whole death and resurrection. And even after having seen the resurrected Lord, he abandons his mission and goes back fishing. And so clearly, he had seen the resurrected Lord. He saw Jesus fulfill everything he said he would do. And then felt like, I blew it so bad. This is never going to be fixed. So the only way to fix this relationship was to go back to where it broke. And Jesus goes back to where it broke in this moment and says, "Do you love me?" Like sacrificial, because remember, I sacrificed myself for you.
Right.
Do you love me sacrificially? Again. And then are we even friends? And it breaks Peter's heart because at that point he goes, "Lord, you know everything." It says it hurt that Jesus even asked that question the 3rd time. He said, "You know everything. You know that I love you." And I love the fact that Jesus gave him the opportunity to emphatically state his love for Jesus. And then every time he said, "I love you," Jesus restated his mission. Then go feed my sheep. That's what I want you to do. You want to show that you love me? you're really my friend, then let's get back on mission together. I'm not done. I'm not done with you. You don't have to be done with me. Let's get back to work and feeding my sheep. And then he tells him, hey, it's a weird way to tell him you're going to die for me, but he lets him know when you're old, they're going to take you and you're where you don't want to go. You're going to die.
Isn't it interesting how every one of the disciples were martyred for Jesus? So one was dragged behind a horse,
John.
Right? Mm-hmm. And then one's crucified upside down. One is all these different horrible ways to die. And right here, Jesus looks beyond. Peter looks beyond Jesus, sees John, and says, "What about him?"
Yeah.
And Jesus is like, "Hey, if I want him to remain alive, that's up to me. I'm not talking about him, Peter. I'm talking about you." And what's interesting is that just coincidentally, John is the only one who isn't martyred. He was attempted. They boiled him in oil.
They tried
to kill him, but he survived. But I just think that's really, really interesting. And listen to this note as well. It says, this was a prediction of Peter's death by crucifixion. Tradition indicates that Peter was crucified for his faith upside down because he did not feel worthy of dying in the same way that his Lord had. Despite what Peter's future held, Jesus told him to follow him. We may be uncertain and fearful about our future, but if we know that God is in control, we can confidently follow Christ.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah, and so, there's a price that has to be paid. Jesus himself tells us that we're going to be persecuted when following him. We'll be having to give up our relationships, our most important relationships, not necessarily having to, but we may have to sacrifice some relationships in our lives if they're unhealthy. Right. And there's a price to be paid. We have to show that Jesus is number one in our lives. So it's not always easy to follow Christ, but it's definitely worth it.
That's right.
So I remember one of my favorite phrases that I preach is, no matter the cost, Jesus is worth the price.
It's true.
It's really good.
That's a good point. Yeah. So Jesus is letting Peter know, hey, you're going to die for me. And for some of us, we would read it and go, oh my goodness, that's the punishment for denying Jesus 3 times. Mm. But it's not. It's the other way around. There's great reward for being a martyr in Scripture, right? And the Bible talks about it in the book of Revelation, the extraordinary rewards for being able to give your life for Christ. And by the way, all the apostles, except for John, as you mentioned, were martyred. So I just looked this up a moment ago, but Peter, these are all according to church tradition, right?
Right.
There's only a couple of them that are actually mentioned in the Bible. But Simon Peter, according to a 2nd century text, said that that Peter was crucified upside down because he didn't feel worthy to be crucified the way that Jesus was. And this happened under the Emperor Nero. So Nero had burned the city of Rome and then blamed Christians for it. So both Paul and Peter were executed about the same time, really close to each other, but he was crucified. Andrew, Peter's brother, was also crucified, and just like his brother. And then James, the son of Zebedee, so John's brother, he was put to death. You can read about that in the book of Acts, where they threw him down and they killed him and put him to death with a sword. So then you have John, who is the writer of the book of John and Revelation and 1st, 2nd, 3rd John. He died natural death. They tried to burn him or boil him alive. Mm-hmm. And here's what Tertullian said. Tertullian was a historian in the 2nd century, and he wrote that the Romans before they exiled John, they brought him into a Colosseum and immersed him in a barrel of boiling oil. But when he emerged unharmed, the entire Colosseum converted to Christianity. That's what Tertullian wrote about that moment when James was John was boiled in oil. Isn't that amazing? So the Romans were trying to make an example out of John, and when he didn't die, the whole Colosseum became Christians.
It's like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
That's exactly right.
That's exactly what that is.
Yep. The Bible or history tells us that Philip was martyred as well. He was executed because of he led a government leader's wife to Christ, so they executed him. Bartholomew was in India. He was cruelly beaten and then he was crucified. Thomas, according to history, was executed in India as well. He was run through with spears. And Matthew was in Ethiopia and suffered martyrdom. He was slain with a halberd, like a spear, kind of a fighting long-stemmed weapon. James was preaching, and he was stoned to death and then was buried beside the temple. Thaddeus, which we often is Judas, the son of James, right? This isn't Judas Iscariot, but the other one. He was beaten and then was turned into coals, a stroke of thunder by these witches. And then the king bare the bodies of the apostles and did this to make a marvelous thing. So he was destroyed, wiped out, executed, and chopped to death during that time. That's a pretty bad way to go.
Yikes.
Simon was martyred. He was crucified in Samaria. And then in Matthias, who was the guy who took Judas's place, was stoned to death in what would be now modern-day Georgia, up north of Armenia. In that area. He was stoned to death and then beheaded. So it's pretty amazing how many of these disciples that they come, they see Jesus. And so when Jesus tells Peter, so then let's get about the mission, and then says, you're going to die for me someday, but between here and there, let's get on this mission, right? I believe that you love me. Now go feed my sheep. He's restoring him and then letting him know, hey, there's a great glory in your future, coming in your future. And it's not going to be easy. Jesus said, in this world you will have trouble, but don't worry, I've overcome the world. And they all were convinced that there was life after this because they saw the bodily resurrection of Jesus. And they knew, okay, if Jesus can defeat death, he'll defeat it for me too.
Right.
Yeah.
And people don't die for something that they made up.
That's correct.
So, there's not a single person that's going to say, absolutely, crucify me upside down or throw me in oil or, spear me to death or whatever it is.
Right. Chop me up. Stone me.
Yeah, of course I'd be willing to, subject myself to that. They would recant.
Right.
They would recant at the last minute. But these men aren't going to do that because they know for a fact that Jesus is the Lord, just like you said. Yeah. It's the same proclamation. Funny that I'm referring to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, but they're the ones that spoke before their sentence was carried out.
Yes.
And they said, hey, listen, we know that the God we serve is able to deliver us out of your hand and out of this fiery furnace. And if he wants to, he's going to do that, essentially. But if he chooses in his wisdom not to do that, let it be known to you, O king, right, we will never bow down and worship the false god in the image that you've set up. Which is such an unbelievable statement. And even though those things aren't recorded for the disciples that you just mentioned, I have to believe that there has to be those kinds of moments where, hey, you're about to be killed. I'm the authority that has the power to put you to death. Do you have anything else to say for yourself? I have to believe that there's going to be those kinds of statements.
Yes.
Because after all, Peter stood in front of the Sanhedrin after in the book of Acts, after having seen the same council put Jesus to death, Peter stands in front of them and says, hey, hypocrites, you're the ones, you've killed all the martyrs, you've killed all the prophets rather.
Right.
And he stands there in the book of Acts and he just accuses them with confidence. How is he able to do that?
And he tells them, we're going to obey God rather than men.
Yes. and he says all of those things with his bony little finger pointed at the council. And the reason why he's able to do that is because he has the confidence of knowing that if God be for us, who could be against us? Right. And he's not going to do that for a made up story of somebody stealing the body and claiming that there's a false resurrection.
And so take this story as just encouragement. You might have felt like you've crossed the line and you can never serve the Lord again. But God's not done with you yet. He's going to want to reestablish that you really do love him, that you really are on his side, and he has a mission for you. There are still many people, his sheep, who have not yet been found. So go find more people, bring them to Jesus, right?
Yeah, that's great. All right. Well, hey, we'll see you next time on The Bible Guys.